This is Market Pathways, your premium guide to global medical device regulation, reimbursement, and policy. Become a part of the global Medtech community at mystrategist.com.
So let's get into a discussion of MDR. And I thought the best place to start would be to give our listeners an understanding of both the process, and I emphasize process because, again, we have listeners both in Europe who are familiar with the process and how things work, and also many in the U.S. who are not familiar with how the European legislative procedure, I'm talking broadly, works. So as we go through this, I may ask you, at a couple of points to just explain, the process and where we go from here. But there was, I think, kind of a misunderstanding in December 9th, after the EPSCO meeting, the meeting of the European health ministers. A lot of people kind of assumed that there was a proposal that came. I don't know if you had the same impression that I did, but I heard a lot of
I saw a lot of consultants legal explaining what had happened, which is, of course, always a bad idea if you don't have legal training. I mean, I'm not a nuclear physicist, so I try to refrain from statements in that field as much as possible. But apparently, consultants are, they think they know everything about everything. So indeed, there were quite a number of people that were immediately, posting things on LinkedIn like, we have an official proposal. No. Now, so why might they have thought that? Because what happened is that twice a year, the European Union has what is called the EPSCO meeting. Why is it twice a year? Because we have two presidencies in the European Union a year. So we have a rotating presidency. So every next half year, another member state gets a presidency. And what they do is they organize all the council meetings in which the representatives of the member states' governments meet and tackle the big issues. So every presidency has its EPSCO meeting. And in the first presidency EPSCO meeting in 2022, the conclusion was, this stuff is going sideways. We are going to mandate the European Commission to come up with a legislative solution for the problem of the enormous pile of certificates that's piling up at the end of the grace period towards May 2024, which notified bodies will not be able to process in time.
I'm going to just interrupt you occasionally, Erik, just to make a point. Well, again, for readers who may not be as familiar, is it fair to refer to those as legacy devices? And there's devices that
these are exactly the legacy devices. So legacy devices are basically all devices that have a valid active implantable medical devices directive or medical devices directive CE certificate that is valid past the date of application of the MDR, so valid past 26 May 2021, and which expires somewhere between 26 May 2021 and 26 May 2024. Those are officially the legacy devices.
And again, the 2024 date is simply because MDR provided, whether you want to call it an extension or whatever period,
in a way, because of course we already had a transitional period in the MDR, because we had a transitional period from 26 May 2017 to 26 May 2020 originally. That was moved in 2020 to 26 May 2021. And then on top was this additional, what they called grace period, during which was basically already, you could say, a compensation mechanism for companies that could not get their device into the MDR during the first transitional period, because during the first transitional period, there were basically almost no notified bodies that were re-notified under the MDR. So because they could sort of see that coming when they fixed the text for the MDR, they already put this additional safety valve period, the grace period, on top. And now what they are looking at with the new proposal is to radically extend this grace period. But before we had this proposal, we came to the second EBSCO meeting where the Commission was scheduled to reveal its proposal.
And that was the meeting on December 9th.
Exactly, yeah. And then what happened was that Commissioner Kyriakides held a speech saying, we are definitely planning a proposal, but it's just not ready yet. But it will look very much like the proposal that we have generally described in a document with no preparation notes for the EBSCO meeting, which contained broad outlines of what the proposal would look like. And of this document, so this prep note, a lot of people thought, oh, this is the official proposal, which was completely wrong because it was so vaguely formulated that you couldn't really call it a proposal. So then 9 December came and went, subsequent confusion. I spent a lot of time playing whack-a-mole with people that were saying it's an official proposal. And I would say, no, it's not an official proposal. You have to wait. And then on 6th January, because the commissioner promised that it would come early January. On 6th January, we had the official proposal, which then was put up for stakeholder consultation from 11 to 18 January. Originally, the Commission made a bit of a silly mistake because they had put in the normal standard consultation period duration, which extended the consultation well into March. People were like, what's happening? Because the proposal went into the proposal was made, so that means it goes into the legislative procedure.
Yeah, explain the process, because there are a lot of people who don't understand that there are actually 3 bodies when you look at the Commission, the Parliament, the Council that have to weigh in on this proposal. So walk people through how that process works.
Yeah, so how it works is that also in Europe we have separation of powers, which is fantastic. So that means that we have a parliament and we have an executive branch, just like they have in most civilized democracies. And what happens is that the bureaucracy is the Commission, and the Commission has the right of initiative for legislative proposals. That's a bit weird because that is not how it works in most democracy, because in most of the democracies, the Parliament has the right of initiative for new legislation. Now, in Europe, it's the Commission, and that means that the Commission makes a proposal. Then normally the default legislative procedure starts, which is called the co-decision procedure, which means that both the Council and the Parliament get to say something about the legislative procedure. So they have to basically agree on the legislative proposal. They can make amendments, and they do that in a number of what we call readings. So we have a first reading and a second reading, basically. And if and basically in the process, at some point, you need to arrive at a point where the Council and the Parliament say, yes, okay, we agree about this proposal and each other's amendments, and then the proposal gets adopted. In this case, we are looking at the also at an accelerated version of the co-decision procedure, which means that they are going to plan things in a lot faster. They are going to decide on things a lot faster than usual, because normally these procedures can take a year easily. But for example, the accelerated procedure can be really, really fast. The proposal in 2020, for example, to amend the MDR to move the date of application a year, that proposal went through in less than a month. So in this case, we have a proposal that is slightly more complicated. But on the other hand, also there the urgency is very much felt. So
now let me ask you: when that went through, subsequent to that, there were some comments that if there was another period discussed, that maybe members would want to take a little more time, and some people thought that went through too quickly. So the one thing I just want to have you explain is also, it is possible at each step of this process for people to offer amendments and change these proposals. Isn't that right?
Yes, that is true. The procedure allows for both the council and the parliament to make amendments, but the opportunities for that are very limited in the accelerated procedure, because otherwise the accelerated procedure would be de-accelerated, which we don't like. So for that reason, but it is true that during a meeting a hearing in the European Parliament, just before the EPSCO meeting on 9 December last year, the commissioner was called to the parliament because a couple of the parliamentarians were really worried about how things were going with the MDR. And a few of them actually said, oh yeah, and by the way, don't think that you are going to whisk this proposal past us like you did in 2020, because this time we really want to have the opportunity to take a good look at it. So it's not excluded that the proposal is going to be amended somewhat, also because I think that but that's my personal opinion, but also an opinion that I've heard from various other experts, is that the proposal as it was currently made is quite open-ended on some points, contains some new concepts that are not defined. So on the one hand, it's let's say an attempt to solve the problem, but on the other hand, it also creates new complexities that I think could be avoided by just paying a bit more attention to certain things. So it might be that they will do some tinkering on the proposal as well in the legislative process, but we'll need to see. I mean, currently, you can track these proposals on the European Union's Eurelex site under preparatory documents. Gives you a very nice overview of the steps that are taken and what is going to happen. You can also look at the legislative observatory site of the European Parliament, where you can check how the proposal is doing in the European Parliament, who are the responsible rapporteurs for the proposal, so you know who you need to lobby and so on. But all of that is underway, so to speak, and we'll need to see how this all plays out.
Everyone, I'm Joey Brenneman from Offscript Health, and we are excited to introduce you to Offscript Health's latest podcast series called Before We Die, the world's best podcast about the medtech industry. So download and subscribe to Before We Die wherever you get your podcasts. You'll get full episodes every Tuesday, and on Thursdays, you'll get our Lab Before Slab mini episodes where Sandy, John, and Craig geek out about the latest happenings in the medtech world. Who would have thought that medical innovation could be so riveting?
Hey, have you heard of Market Pathways? Market Pathways provides the most in-depth analysis you'll find of the changes happening in medical device regulation and reimbursement every day. They address the complexity in regulatory affairs and beyond by helping you digest and contextualize technical topics like Medicare and MDR. Visit mystrategist.com/trial today to start your free 5-day trial to Market Pathways. Again, that's mystrategist.com/trial for 5 days of online access.
Your support is valuable and makes us better. Please remember to leave a review and rate Market Pathways on Apple Podcasts or wherever you happen to listen.
So let's get into some specifics, Erik. Now that, unlike after the December 9th meeting when people were talking about a proposal that really didn't exist, now we actually have a proposal. So let's talk about some of the key points. And let me throw out a couple of general points that I was hearing people asking about, and tell me, what the proposals do regarding these issues. Of course, I think top of mind for a lot of people was the question of, will the proposal revive MDD? And again, MDD, I don't want to get too deep into acronyms here. The Medical Device Directive was the regulation that preceded MDR. But the question of whether the proposal would revive MDD certificates that had already expired, and under kind of what circumstances, that was something that I heard a lot about. The question that we talked about the 2024 transition period. Some people have asked, will the proposal extend that grace period? And also, the question of, and I'll let you explain this in greater detail, what's referred to as the Article 97 bridging solution set out in the MDCG documents. And we can get into, again, I don't want to overwhelm people with acronyms, but those were a couple that were top of mind from what I've heard. If you could address, what does the proposal say about those, and if there are other key provisions that you want to talk about?
Okay, yeah, let's first talk about these three, because of course people are very interested in that. So revival of certificates, yes, that is a thing, but the certificate needs to have been a legacy device certificate. So if you had a certificate for a medical device under the old directives that's expired before the date of application of the MDR, so before 26 May 2021, then too bad, so sad, no revival of certificate for you. But if you had a certificate that expired between after the date of application, then it might revive. But the problem is that this is the way they set up the proposal. It's a very conditional proposal, because the proposal says, so if you have a certificate for a legacy device that was valid on 26 May 2021, so legacy device definition, and it has not been withdrawn, so it can't have been invalid because of withdrawal, but needs to have expired because the end date on the certificate passed, then the device may actually relive and be valid until either 31 December 2027 or 31 December 2028 for depending on the risk class of the device. So it's 2027 for class 3 devices and for class 2 implantable devices, and 31 December 2028 for class 2D devices, class 2A devices, and this is really important, class 1 devices that need a notified body. So these are the sterile conditions, measuring functions, devices, but also and I've seen that this is a point that's often misunderstood. These are MDR classification terms. So classification under the MDR is slightly different from classification under the MDD. So if you, for example, have a class 1 software device that is class 2A under the MDR, which basically is almost 100% chance if you had such a device, there was the option that you could reissue your declaration of conformity just before the date of application and then write out the whole grace period on your declaration of conformity. And then before the end of the grace period, you needed to have MDR class 2A. But in this case, you would be a class 2A device. So you could qualify for the 2028 time frame. But now here's the kicker. On the condition that before the expiry of the certificate, so again, you are a legacy device, you have a certificate, but before the certificate had expired, as a condition, you have needed to be already on board with a notified body. So if you had been sitting on your hands, thinking, which I've been warning people for years by now, and thinking like, oh, I have time, 24 is far away, I have time, and you don't have an agreement with the notified body by the time that this proposal enters into force, then there is no automatic revival of your certificate. And your certificate remains as invalid as it ever was. So that's a bit of a problem. But it may also relive if you had an Article 59 or an Article 97 exemption. These are, and that you do not need, by the way, at the date of expiry of the certificate, strangely enough. But anyway, so what you could still do is see if you could get an Article 59 derogation or an Article 97 application, which we will talk about later. And then you could also, let's say, pole vault yourself into the relive category.
Let me ask you one point, because one of the criticisms that I'm hearing is that this kind of allowing these extensions based on risk, so risk-based extensions, which is kind of a model, and we're going to talk later about IVDR, but it kind of tracks a little bit about the extensions with IVDR, but is an opportunity for companies to, let's say, kick the can down the road a little bit, if you know the expression that I'm using there.
Yes. I've often used it myself, and okay, I would say yes and no.
Is that a valid criticism?
I would say yes and no. Okay. Because what the EU at least was planning to do with this proposal is not reward manufacturers that have been kicking the can down the road. So what are they doing? They're basically, the proposal has been set up in a way that if you want to qualify for so we were just talking about under the circumstances under which your certificate may relive, right? Now we are going to talk about the circumstances under which your certificate may be valid longer, so past 2024. And these conditions are really strict, and they have a very strict kicking the can down the road hurdle in it. So let's go back to the class 1, the software device manufacturer, who will have a class 2A device under the MDR. That software manufacturer just, I don't know, he reads or she reads an article written by a consultant on the internet that says extension until 2028 for class 1 devices under the MDD. And that person thinks like, fantastic. I don't have to do anything until 2028. End of 2028 even. Well, this is not the case because what do you need to do in order to qualify for either the 2027 period, depending on risk, or the 2028 period, depending on your risk class? You must have put in place a fully compliant medical devices regulation quality system by 26 May 2024. So this is already a major step, because this means more than just being ISO 13485 certified, because there's a lot of extra stuff in the MDR. So you need to have done that by 26 May 2024, next year, by the way. So it's closer than you think. Mm-hmm. And before 26 May 2024, you need to have lodged an application for conformity assessment under the MDR with a notified body, and you need to have signed a formal agreement with the notified body for this for this purpose. So that means that this manufacturer that thinks that he has a backstop date at end of 2028 actually needs to be fully compliant with the MDR already next year, because otherwise you don't meet the requirement of having a fully compliant MDR quality system, and you cannot make a conformity assessment application at the notified body, because that means handing in your quality system documentation and handing in your technical documentation, which both need to be completely up to standards, need to contain all the clinical data. So basically, these people have to be ready by the MDR next year in order to get 4.5 years extra to complete the conformity assessment by the notified body. And this, I cannot stress enough, is how people should look at the extension period. Not at, I can sit on my hands, so not as I, manufacturer, can sit on my hands, but the notified body that I have to have an application in the door with by May 2024, that notified body, they get basically until 31 December 2027 or 2028 time to finish my conformity assessment application, which starts 26 May 2024 at the very latest. So basically, this long period passed between 2024 and 2027 or 2028 gives notified bodies the opportunity to do load balancing, but it does not give manufacturers the opportunity to sit on their hands, because everybody needs to be in the door at a notified body and have a fully compliant quality system by end of May next year. So there's a lot of work to do. No time to sit on your hands.
Your practice embraces both, large strategics and small and medium-sized companies. What has your experience been? Are companies being diligent about these deadlines, or do you have to prod them and remind them that they need to kind of pick up the pace and move ahead?
Well, again, it varies. I mean, of course, I don't have to do anything, because basically, as an external lawyer, the more of a mess people make, the more money I earn in the end. But that's, of course, a perverse incentive in a way. But I've been very active explaining also on my blog for years and years that people should not wait with this. I mean, it's like Christmas shopping. Every idiot understands that Christmas shopping, you want to buy a Christmas turkey, don't do it on the last possible day. Or go Christmas present shopping, don't do it on the last day, because everything is gone and it will still be crowded. So people understand that logic. But what you often don't see in companies is that they don't understand the logic of waiting with MDR application until the very last day. Because often, and what I usually see within companies is that there is a kind of, let's say, weird dynamic going on where the management says, oh, this is expensive. This is going to take lots of resources. until when do we have? What's the last maximum date? Okay, so then we wait until the very last possible date. Not every company does this, but a lot of companies have this as a knee-jerk reaction. Then you have the nice, kind nerds in regulatory that say, no, management, don't wait this long. It will be stupid. You will risk things. We need more resources to do this. We can't do this as a hobby project on Sunday afternoon next to our own job. This is serious. And even after the applications have gone in, we still need to do a lot of extra work forever. So please resource us properly. And in this dynamic, you often see companies get caught up. And it can happen in big companies that you have a business unit caught up in this. Or I see it in smaller and medium-sized companies where just the whole company gets caught up on this when they don't have separate business units. But I mean, I've been helping some of the, I think about 3-4 of the world's biggest medical devices companies with their MDR transition program. And I've been, let's say, a sort of embedded person in their process. And with some companies that have relatively independently operating business units, you could really see quite different, a lot of divergence between MDR strategies, and some would go. Some would be more conservative, and others would be kicking the can down the road a bit more. And you also see small and medium-sized companies that just have absolutely no clue and completely miss the point. That happens a lot less in bigger companies, but that's basically what the landscape looks like. And what I've also seen that's also interesting is I've seen a lot of medium-sized companies being put up for sale that were sold to private equity companies that had absolutely no clue about this whole transitional regime going on. And you would see management of these small and medium-sized companies go like, yes, sold the company just before this whole stupid NDR project needed to happen. And hey, good luck, you naive private equity fund. Good luck with, selling off the assets when this whole thing tanks, because we have absolutely zero of a plan for medical devices regulation transition. Mm-hmm. That also happened quite a lot. And I think it even happened more under the IVD regulation, so the sister regulation of the medical devices regulation, because I saw investors there that even had less of a clue of what was going on there. So investors, beware, do a good due diligence and have it done by an expert, because a lot of mistakes are made by targets that you want to buy.
So you mentioned M&A. Let me ask you kind of go down a little side road here. And one of the issues that came up with MDR was a concern that there would be an increasing amount of, let's just call it, portfolio rationalization, particularly on the part of large companies who would make the decision that it's not worth it for them to continue certain product lines which had, let's say, limited customer bases. It wasn't worth the additional resources and clinical data that they'd have to compile under MDR. So it made sense for them to just sell those product lines. Have you seen that? Was that realistic? And has that been tempered somewhat by the proposal extending these deadlines? In other words, does that make these large companies think twice before they divest certain product lines?
Yes, first question. Yes, I've seen especially some of my big clients massively shed products that were not sufficiently profitable to go into the MDR. Especially when the MDR came out in 2017, you saw companies like J&J, for example, embark on massive rationalization exercises that really caused a lot of rationalization. So yes, that is definitely a thing. did the proposal now do anything for that? No, because everybody that was going to rationalize for the MDR has done it by now. If you still need to start doing this if you still need to start by now to check if it's a good idea or not, then I think you have bigger problems than, yeah.
So let me throw another acronym into the mix for those who are not familiar with the group MDCG. I'm going to let you explain MDCG, but I want to have that lead into they've been very active. They issued a group of 19 proposals, but specifically, I wanted to talk about what's been referred to as the bridging measure. And that's one of those areas that people have been concerned about, and how this new proposal will relate to what people refer to as the Article 97 MDR bridging measure that was set out by MDCG. And I think this is important because Article 97 MDR is really only needed where the law doesn't provide for a solution allowing the manufacturer to be compliant for the device concerned. So explain to people, first of all, what MDCG is and what role they play, and then let's talk about the bridging measure.
Sure. Yeah. So the MDCG is a body that is defined in the MDR, Article 105, actually, and it's part of the governance landscape of the operating system of the MDR, so to say. So the MDCG, the Medical Devices Coordination Group, it's called, is a body composed of experts delegated by the member states, by the governments of the member states. So that means that each union member state gets a seat in the MDCG, and the MDCG has a number of governance tasks. One of which is to provide guidance. And also other things, common specifications, and so on. But guidance production is one of their tasks. It's presided by the European Commission, but the European Commission doesn't have a vote in the process, which is also interesting. But what happens is that what happened with the MDR is that the MDR is basically it's a framework legislation. So when it came out in 2017, a lot was still unclear, was open, and so on. So they needed to produce a lot of guidance documents, delegated acts, implementing acts to basically make the MDR operational. And this is a large part of what the MDCG does. They make guidance documents and then pretend that these guidance documents are actually law, and make notified bodies apply them like they are law. Well, this is a bit of an oversimplification, but it happens that actually notified bodies, for example, are instructed to do this. This is getting a bit less. I've myself been very militant against this process of pseudo lawmaking, basically. And what you see is if you look on the website of the MDCG, where it lists its guidance, for example, you can see that since the MDR came into force, well, they've produced an impressive amount of guidance documents, more than there ever were under the MDD and the AIMDD during the almost 30 years that these directives were in place. So that also shows that the MDR needed a lot of additional operationalization. So now back to your 19 points. So the MDCG is also concerned with as the law says, it is supposed to contribute to the assessment of conformity assessment bodies and notified bodies, and to also advise the Commission on matters regarding notified bodies. Because the way it works with notified bodies is that member states notified bodies. So a member state gets to basically, so that's what it was like traditionally, gets to decide, okay, this notified body is okay. I'm going to write a letter to Brussels saying this notified body is considered by me to be competent to be notified body in the meaning of this regulation or this directive. Now, under the MDD and the AIMDD, this led to a lot of quality differences between notified bodies. So already under the MDD, there was a program, the Joint Assessment Program, under which member states and the Commission together would do joint assessments of notified body to basically do informal harmonization of quality. Now, under the MDR, which I think was a bit of a mistake, but we only found out about that afterwards, every notified body that was already notified needed to re-notify. Because it was considered on a political level, you can't trust notified bodies as they are, so they all need to go through the laundry again, reapply. But this process took forever, and still it's not finished, which caused the capacity problem. Now, just
so people know, I mean, at the peak, and correct me if my memory is off, I think there are around 85 notified bodies roughly under the MDD. Now, again, nobody expects there ever, I think it's fair to say, to be that many notified bodies. And there were problems with some of those notified bodies. Mm-hmm. But the reality is that I think we're up to 37, if I counted correctly. I may be off by one or two. But
yeah, there was one announced today, I think. Again, under the MDR, maybe 38 or 37.
Maybe 38.
I don't know. I've stopped counting. But I also think that the discussion about how many notified bodies is not that relevant. I would rather think it's more relevant. What is the capacity of the notified bodies that have been notified?
Right.
Because when the MDR became applicable, I think we had 50, or now when the notified bodies could start to re-notify under the MDR, I think we had, of these more than 80 notified bodies, there were already only 55 left. That's something people often forget.
Right.
And yeah, basically, I mean, most of the capacity available is already notified. So that is not so much the problem. Every other one that joins now, they are usually niche notified bodies or notified bodies that are very late to the game and basically are not going to make a difference in certification capacity.
Right. I mean, put differently, it really becomes a question of notified body resources rather than the number of notified bodies that.
Yeah, and if you look at the big notified bodies like TÜV Süd and BSI, for example, they have almost doubled in size of NDR personnel. So, I mean, those are significant increases in capacity. But if you have like a niche notified body from Bulgaria that has gone from 2 persons to 5 persons or something, that's not going to make the difference.
So let's talk about, there are a couple of things, and I want to get into the MDCG recommendations regarding notified bodies, but I want to get back to the bridging measure. And again, people refer to it differently. You had alluded to the notion of derogation previously. Some countries, it's referred to as formal non-compliance. I think that may be Germany or others. So it maybe goes up under a different name. But talk a little bit about what the proposal, how does it address that, and how companies should think about that process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so what we already had in the MDR were basically 2 exemptions to devices being CE marked. Because the problem, of course, is if your notified body doesn't have capacity and your certificate expires, you are in a situation of not being CE marked. So we had 2 provisions in the MDR that could basically help you out then. The derogation under Article 59, which is only available for basically measures that are crucial to care in a specific member state and for which there is no other equivalent on the European market.
And Erik, is it also fair to say that derogation may be a one-shot deal in that, in other words, if company A applies for it, it may be difficult for a competitor?
Yes, because then you can't say that there is an equivalent, right? So or you can't say there is no equivalent. So as soon as you have equivalence in a market, then it already Article 59 becomes a problem. So what you also have is Article 97, which basically says if you have a device that poses absolutely no problem in terms of risk and safety, but there is formal non-compliance for one or the other reasons. So basically, paperwork is not okay because you cannot make the paperwork okay because the notified body that is supposed to help you make the paperwork okay is just not available. Under those circumstances, member states can grant you a temporary exemption. And so then to get to the bridging measure, when this proposal to extend the MDR was not on the table, the MDCG was thinking about, how are we going to deal with all these expiring certificates if the MDR is not changed? So they wrote a position paper, or I would say actually a series of position papers, in which they laid out, look, we are going to take measures to basically give the notified bodies more leeway to be efficient. And on the other hand, we are also going to explain how manufacturers may rely on Article 97 in case they are in the door at a notified body, but for some reason or the other, the notified body does not manage to finish the conformity assessment procedure before the certificate expires. In that case, it would be really sad if you can't be on the market anymore just because of this situation. And then what we will do is we will give you an Article 97 exemption, typically for a year. If you can prove that your device is beyond reproach, has a spotless vigilance record, we will not get in trouble with it as a member state and so on. And in that case, we will give you an extra year of a validity during which your notified body can finish the conformity assessment procedure. That is what they issued in September last year, September 22, with the MDCG 2022-14 position paper. But this is sort of being passed on the right now by the extension proposal, because if there's an extension of the validity of your certificate, you don't have an invalid certificate. If you don't have an invalid certificate, you don't have formal non-compliance, so you don't need Article 97. So they originally called it as a bridging measure because it was basically the only bridge to bridge from a situation of the legacy device to the MDR, to bridge basically the non-compliance gap if your certificate would expire ahead of time. But now a bridge will be built, and it will be a huge bridge by the extension proposal. And basically reliance on Article 97 will be rare, I think, which is good because persons like me completely didn't trust the competent authorities of the member states in the EU to have sufficient capacity to deal with a lot of Article 97 applications. So that's why also this proposal is a good thing.
Let me address a couple of general points that people have expressed concerns about the MDR and see if you look at the proposal as being helpful at all. For example, one of the big issues that companies face is the notion of what constitutes a significant change in a device and triggering the regulation. Let me throw a couple others out. There's concern about the orphan device, the lack of a clear orphan device provision, and then also the role of panels, because I think it often gets confused. It often gets compared to the role of panels with the FDA in the U.S., and it's actually quite different. So, are those still areas that are open for discussion and need for clarification, or have they been clarified at all under this new proposal?
No, because the proposal doesn't change anything in the three points that you mentioned. And again, but this is important. Legacy devices cannot be subject to a significant change, because then you lose the validity of your certificate. So even if you think like, goodness, I am in the grace period until 2028 with my software, for example. Very nice, but you cannot make any significant changes to the legacy device until 2028. So no extension of functionality, for example, which is, that's actually not that good. Basically, the design and the intended purpose of the device are frozen for the whole period that you are a legacy device. So that's actually not that nice. And then orphan devices. This was something that a lot of people hoped that might have been addressed in the proposal, but it's not. In Europe, we just don't have any specific procedures for orphan devices. We also don't have procedures for breakthrough devices, where I think the FDA really did a very good job on this. And I think more generally, you can say that sort of the regulatory competition pendulum has swung the other way, because, there was a time that everybody went Europe first because the FDA was slow. They required clinical trials for everything. And so you went to Europe, then you used the Europe as guinea pigs, and then you had a lot of clinical data, and then you went back to the US. Not anymore, because basically the European process has become so complex and also plagued by delays in clarity, capacity restrictions, that it's just not reliable at the moment. And that means that I see a lot of European companies now actually think like, okay, we go US first, because the FDA are nice, competent people, and they have a breakthrough devices program that gets us to the market very quickly. The US market is also very attractive because it's just as big as the European one. So why wait? Let's go there first. Americans be guinea pigs, and then we will do our homework in Europe. So that's
to that point, I've even heard CEOs say that after the US, they're going to go to Asia. China and Japan has actually started to show up on the radar screens before we go to Europe.
Yeah, and there's even countries in Europe like Switzerland that are now saying, by the way, we are not going to rely on CE marking anymore to mutually recognize devices on our market, because a small country like Switzerland has to basically partner with a regulatory system. And they used to be completely tied into the CE system. But at the moment, they are actually considering recognizing FDA-approved devices, which I think sounds easier than it is for them, because they are so deeply invested in CE logic. But we'll see. At least it was something that really shook up the community here. And I think hopefully also gave a lot of people in the European bureaucracy a bit more sense of urgency there.
There's some talk that the UK may go in a similar direction. What about the role of panels, Erik? Because that's, I think, another point that there's some confusion about that. And I think part of that relates to the difference between the role of panels under MDR and the role of panels with the FDA.
Yeah, so we have expert panels for the MDR, which are let's say, an extra layer of evaluation of clinical evidence for certain devices. And that expert panel system has been functioning for some time. So for certain devices, there's basically a double check on the clinical evaluation. So basically, the clinical strategy for the device by a European expert, a European level expert panel, and they deliver a report. And then the notified body can either decide, okay, I'm going to follow this report or not. And if they don't follow the report, then member states can say, then we prohibit the device. So usually both the notified body and the manufacturer will say, better follow this report, even if we don't like it. There's quite some criticism from the regulatory community as well on how these expert panels function, because there's a lot of medical people on the expert panel, but not so many regulatory people. So you sometimes see them use reasoning and logic of which you think like, this doesn't fit the system, people. Come on, what planet are you from? But anyway, so there's that. And then the most recent development in that regard is that also, finally, the scientific advice procedure for medical devices is now coming online, because there's also an option in the MDR to go to an expert panel for scientific advice. And that's analogous to what you can do with the FDA. Yeah? So you can go to the FDA and say, this is what I'm planning. This is my clinical strategy. What do you think? And is that hitting the mark or not? So that is now becoming operational. Actually, for people that are interested, the EMA, the European Medicines Agency, administrates this whole process, which is another interesting development, because European Medicines Agency administrating expert panels for medical devices. Where is this going? Right? Are we going slowly moving towards Euro FDA in the European Medicines Agency? I mean, we might get a EMMA, so European Medicines and Medical Devices Agency. No, that would be an EMMDA, a Medical Devices Agency.
One other area that has raised concerns from the EBSCO meeting back in December to the proposal is how the Commission is treating the sell-off provision. And that has raised concern amongst companies and distributors. So I'd like you to take a minute to just kind of talk about that issue, why it's so important, and what the proposal clarify?
Sure.
Does the proposal clarify the question?
Yes and no, because the sell-off period in the MDR was basically set up in a way that it was a grace period on top of the grace period, because the MDR functioned in a way that it was said, okay, we want no more new legacy devices being placed on the market after 26 May 2024. But the legacy devices that have been placed on the market after 26 May 2024 can still be sold off to the end users until 27 May 2025. So basically, you have a year to clear out your supply chain. That turned out to be actually quite short for most medical devices manufacturers that have devices with a longer expiry date or slow supply chain. And then, that was going to really contribute to basically potential medical device shortages as well. Because, of course, once you cannot further make devices available because the sell-off period has expired, you can't sell them in the Union anymore. So you have to sell them to Africa, to Asia, to the Middle East, maybe to the US, South America, but not in Europe. So then the Commission decided, okay, we are also going to propose in this proposal that we are going to remove the sell-off period, which means that basically now there is no sell-off period anymore. And you can sell off your legacy devices until eternity. So whatever you can stockpile before your certificate expires, if you are not going to go into the MDR, or before 31 December 2027 or 28, you can sell off forever. So that means that potentially we might still have legacy devices still trickling through the European supply chain by 2030, 2040, 2050, if they are surgical instruments that have no expiry date because they need to be sterilized before use. So all of that is possible. And the proposal did one other weird thing. It also removed the sell-off date for in vitro diagnostics under the in vitro diagnostics regulation. So it's also important to know for people in the in vitro diagnostics industry.
Great. Well, Erik, let me wrap up with one. I'm not going to ask you to look into your crystal ball because we know that if you could
why not? Here, look what I have.
But one area,
it's a magic 8 ball. I will gladly shake it for you.
You've got all the answers there. But we've been talking about notified bodies, and I think we would be remiss if we didn't wrap up with a discussion. And let's tie in the MDCG with that, because they had I alluded to the fact that they had rolled out 19 recommendations, if you will, to try to improve notified body capacity and make the process more efficient. And I think a lot of people are looking for that. Again, going back to your point, it's not the number of notified bodies, but it's the resources and their efficiency. And are you optimistic? Because that seems to be one of the real chief bottlenecks that companies are concerned about. Are you optimistic that by adopting some or most of those recommendations, that we can really avoid that kind of bottleneck with notified bodies moving ahead?
Well, I think these were measures that were all put forward, basically the famous 19 measures that were put forward in the MDCG 2022-14 position paper. And I've also written a detailed article on my blog about that.
Tell people how they can access your blog.
Oh, it's very easy. It's medicaldeviceslegal.com. And it's free, so no paid content, no paywalls, and there's a detailed article on it on what I think about this position paper. There are quite a lot of good measures in it, also because these are basically things that the MDCG did not make up themselves, but which were basically telegraphed to them by stakeholders. And there are also some measures in there of which I think, like, okay, this is kind of silly. Like, for example, that's the 19th measure. Like, the medicines agencies should maybe do their best to process reapplications for device-drug combinations quicker. Yeah. Hello, MDCG people. These are part of your own member state organization. You can just tell them to take this stuff seriously. So these are things of which I think, like, sorry, I mean, what are you saying? But on the other, there were also lots of good measures. Like, for example, combining work on where a manufacturer has a legacy device for which they have also made an application under the MDR, then the notified body needs to do both surveillance audits, but also audits but also look at the technical documentation and the quality system for the MDR. But this is work you can combine. So this is, for example, one of the measures that they put in this position paper. Also, also the measure that remote audits are possible, things like that. So there are quite some good measures in it. But and if this all gets deployed, then of course, it will definitely contribute. But how much? That's hard to predict. I don't know if there's a how much answer in my magic 8 ball. Let's shake it.
What does the magic 8 ball say?
It says answer unclear, ask later. Well, that's exactly what we should do, because we will only know afterwards, right? Whether there was sufficient capacity and whether it's hindsight. Yeah, that's the best way to look at things.
I think that's the perfect note to end on. And I want to thank you, Erik, so much for taking the time to go into this detail on what is a complex subject. And I think the magic 8 ball is right. What we'll have to do is have you back on this podcast in the future to talk about how things evolve in the whole process. So thank you again so much for joining us. I encourage everybody to go to Erik's blog and check that out. And again, we'll look forward to having you join us again to follow this continuing saga. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks very much.
We hope you enjoyed that episode. Your support is valuable and makes us better. Please remember to leave a review and rate Market Pathways on Apple Podcasts or wherever you happen to listen.